I did my first development, which was a reno flip type, or they call it a flip now, reno sell is what I call it back then. That wasn't without challenges, but it went well. And I made about $50,000 back in 2009. So obviously with inflation and things, numbers are different now, but that was a good amount of money then because I was earning about $75,000 in what was considered a pretty good job for someone of my age. Businesses have the same issues of whatever cash flow cycle they're in. I value stability and safeties. I think I can get paid at least 12 months with the cycle of staggering deals. I'll put 2 years of expenses aside. So now I've got 100% redundancy. When you're taking a leap of faith, it is good to have a bit of comfort around you. But I think it's really just been refining processes and turning this into a business. I run a business now. We have 13 projects on at the moment. We usually buy 4 to 6 projects a year. We are a property syndicator, so we raise capital and work with investors who invest in our projects. That removes one of the biggest constraints with development is capital. So if you want to do more projects, how do you fund them? Well, we partner with other people and share the upside. So that works really well. Cash flow is a real constraint. Finding positive cash flow property was good when the rents were going up and the interest rates were low the last few years. Just as a single tenancy, you're losing whatever you're losing through negative gearing. So your property to break even over time might have to start achieving an average couple of % growth a year.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management, sales and buyers agency servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here's your host, Jared Mann.
G'day and welcome to another episode of Perth Property Insider. Today, I'm really excited to have Adam Barry on the show, bit of a household name in the Perth property development space and a good friend of mine. We're on the Health and Six Pack CEO journey together as well. So end up having some really good chats on our walks. And today, I've got him along to share his whole journey from being an employee across to doing property development full time. And I think there's going to be heaps to gain from this. Even if you don't have aspirations to be a full-time developer, you could probably, hopefully today, pick up a lot as a mum and dad developer and look to add this into your strategy in the coming years, especially as development gets more feasible. So, Adam, welcome to the show.
Jared, good to see you, mate. Thanks for having me.
Now, of course, you are one of the admins of Perth Property Development Group on Facebook.
Yep, Perth Property Developers, PPD as we call it. Yep, we've run that group for a few years now. Yeah.
So if you're not a member of that and you do have an interest in this space, head on over and join in the conversations there. I know you guys have a few different events every now and then, but you're probably pretty busy these days, so not having as many maybe as usual.
Yeah, I haven't had as many, but we are planning to fire that up. In development, networking is really important because I've never met anyone that can do a development end to end on their own, from building houses to surveying land to get lending money. So yeah, we really value that community. It's a great place. It's really good to catch up with everyone when we do events. So yeah, should have another one coming up in a month or so, and then try and get them a bit more regular than what we've been doing.
Well, it's a good inspiration and kick up the butt for me too, because with Perth Property Investment, the Facebook group, at one stage I was doing monthly sort of meetups prior to COVID happening. Then COVID sort of changed the game and I decided to start this podcast around that time too. So about maybe 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And I haven't really got back in the swing of events. So I probably do 1 or 2 a year and get a reasonable turnout. But I should do more because it's nice seeing people face to face and swapping what's working and what doesn't work and just, getting inspiration. So
yeah, and social, yeah, it's good fun. All right, so we'll do some, you do some, it'll be great.
We'll go to each other's. So give us a bit of the backstory for those that haven't heard it before. What were you doing before property development and what kind of sparked this interest?
Yeah, I'm a bit fortunate in this space in that I very much come from a property family. So my mother was a real estate agent for a long time and my father still is a valuer, runs his own valuation business. And when I was growing up, they would do little developments on the side. They worked out pretty early that was a great way to build wealth and give them flexibility around not just working jobs. And, being young, we could really see the tangible outcomes of that. It allowed them to, upgrade their renovate the house, new kitchen, go on holidays, those sorts of things. So when I was a kid, I didn't like them because I get pulled over to crappy houses on the weekend and sit there while they were doing renovation work. But I guess the seed was planted. And then as I got older, it was really around the time I finished uni, I went to uni with the plan to start a professional career. I started in strategic purchasing, or procurement as it's called, working for government and mining companies.
Probably a good sort of, grounding in some of these ways of thinking.
Yeah, it was very good commercial grounding, very good. We're setting up very large contracts and doing tenders and negotiation and all sorts of stuff. But it was never my passion. I'd never, as a kid, said that's where I wanted to end up.
I don't know so many people that are at, primary school that say, I want to be a procurement expert, or, it doesn't really happen.
Exactly, yeah. And it's a funny little profession. Most people fall into it one way or the other, right? And
but it's similar with real estate too. Like, I don't know too many people that sit around and say, I want to be a real estate agent when I grow up, or I want to be a property developer when I grow up. Like, doesn't often happen anyway.
Yeah. It's not fireman or airplane pilot, is it?
As my little girl wants to be. But
so the seed had been planted, and I'd started work. Yeah, because that's really just what you did. If you did well at school, you go get a degree, you go get a white collar job, and I think probably from my parents' influence that I knew that that's okay, but it won't get you too far. Or to get far is hard. It's up to someone else to decide if you get promoted, and the more you get promoted, the less opportunities there are for further promotion. So you're going to hit a wall at some point, and that's something I've never liked. I'm a self-motivated person. I like to work hard. If I have a goal, I pursue it, but I want to know that if I've got the freedom to do the work and figure it out myself. I don't want someone else sitting there deciding whether I get to move forward or not. I find that very frustrating. So I knew that I just wanted to be able to create some wealth of my own and give myself flexibility. I didn't have any, real clear plan around that, other than having more money than what you spent is a secret to a happy life. So I would have been in my early 20s and had a job, so I had borrowing, and that's when I decided, time to start working this property thing out. Let's figure out what to do.
Was there a sort of turning point in there where a few things started to go right and you decided, hey, I might be able to pursue this full time?
Well, it was an interesting journey for me. I was pretty young to get into this space. A lot of people I meet are probably more around our age now. You might have younger kids, and that's when you say, "Oh, actually, I want that flexibility around my family." For me, as a young, someone in my early to mid 20s, I'd go to a lot of events, and I'd always be the youngest one in the room, and I found that a bit hard initially. But what really happened with it was initially it was just get some more money, get some freedom around, give myself choices. I didn't really want to do developing. I actually wanted to do buy and hold investing. What I really struggled with, though, was I had enough money to buy a property, but I couldn't get over the fact that if I bought something and it didn't grow, then I'd have to go save up another deposit again. And this was around 2009, 2010 in Perth. And had I bought something in Perth then, it may very well not have grown for 10 years. So, it probably comes back to what I said before around controlling my outcome. I read a lot of books to try and figure out what would be the best approach before I jumped in. And Steve McDowell was a very popular author back then, and he'd written some books focused all around adding value to real estate. And I remember when I first read...
I've had Steve on the show before, so listeners can...
Oh, they know. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, Steve's been a good inspiration to a lot of people for a generation of developers and investors. And so I remember when I read his first book, I couldn't get through it. It just really triggered me because what was happening is everything he was saying made sense around adding value, but I didn't like that idea because it seemed like a lot of work and I wasn't ready for it.
And it is a lot of work, and it is a very different way of investing. So
definitely. And I wouldn't really even call it investing. I'd call it it's a business. But yeah, I'm sure we'll delve into that as we unpack it.
Active job, I guess, but if you still, produce a better hourly rate with your time than you could in your PAYG job, then it starts to make sense, or at least should be considered, I guess.
That's right. And that's, again, being younger, one thing I didn't have was capital. At 24, I'd saved some money, but, anyone who's done it, or most people to start have done it. Saving is a slow process when you're on a fixed income. You can cut your expenses. Being a single guy without kids, I could cut my expenses pretty well, but there's a limit to how low that can go.
Just the rate that you can try to get ahead, it's very slow, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And so developing and then adding value was a great way to turbocharge that. So, but as I said, I didn't like the idea initially, but I came back to it because I thought, well, if I'm going to do this and put my capital all in, which I'd have to do, then I want to make sure I get a result. I don't want to buy something and then be stuck having to save all over again to get another deposit. So that was the starting point. But your question was, okay, well, what point did I decide to quit my job? The inspiration is probably after I did my first development, which was a reno flip type. Well, they call it a flip now. Reno sell is what I call it back then. And that wasn't without challenges, but it went well. And I made about $50,000 back in 2009. So obviously with inflation and things, numbers are different now, but that was a good amount of money then because I was earning about $75,000 in what was considered a pretty good job for someone of my age. So,
and when you do your first project, like that money, just like the process of making it for me just really changed my whole world. Like 50K today, like I don't really get out of bed for, but and everything changes. So when you're back starting out, I think the creation of that, you've added value, you've created that, and when you compare it to your job, like it starts to become tempting, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that was what I earned 2/3 of my annual wage doing a part-time thing that was only a 9-month project. So, those were the numbers that got me excited. And I realized through doing it that I enjoyed it more than what I was doing. I was more passionate about it. Yes, it was hard work. I was learning. But, that was something I really just felt connected to versus my job was, okay, I liked the people I worked with. It kept me engaged to a certain level, but it just wasn't my future. And looking back now and the benefit of hindsight, I would not be a happy man today if I was still doing that job because it wasn't my calling in life. So that was the point that I said, okay, I want to figure out how to do this full time. But getting to that point required a bit of sorting out. But that was really the inspiration where I said, yeah, this is what I want to do.
And looking back, I guess, how do you make that initial leap? Because plenty of people have these kind of ideas and they're still accepting their current reality and aren't willing to take that risk. So how do you get that confidence to do it?
Well, it all depends on your personality and temperament. I'm a fairly risk-averse person and I value stability. So for me, what came up when I started working towards it was, okay, I do value stability and a job is very stable. I was working for a mining company at the time, stable employer, good income. That's the sort of job that I would never lose. It's good enough to keep it. Even if you did, you'd have other options. So while it wasn't that fulfilling, that regular paycheck every month, above average income, it's a very safe place to be. And people talk about the golden handcuffs, and to me that is why it's safe. You're in your comfort zone. You're maybe not doing everything you want, but you know that you're always going to be able to save a bit of money, go on your holiday, pay off your mortgage slowly. So stepping away from that was the hard bit. And there are a couple of things I have to do to get to the point. of being comfortable to leave. One was very practical. A couple were very practical. It's okay. That's nice that by the time I'd done a few more projects by the time I said, no, I want to take the lead. But I needed a track record. I needed the experience. I needed confidence that I could succeed. So, again, off your temperament for me, that was do 3 or 4 projects and really prove, yes, I've made money each time and I've compounded. I'd started working with a coach. We've both done the program that I did, results mentoring. They were crucial in just giving me support. And, we spoke about networks earlier. They also have a really good network, which I'm still part of to this day. So I had a support system in place. And really the last practical thing was money in the bank. And so I looked at that as buying time. So development is highly profitable when you do it well. The margins are very, very good, much better than most other businesses, much, much better. The cash flow, though, about as bad as you get.
Other end of the spectrum.
Yeah. So, this is a perpetual challenge in this space of how do you make that work for you? So, I'll just explain what that means for anyone who's new to this. If you think of a reno flip, how long do you think it takes to do that? 6 months, 9 months? That's a pretty good outcome. Well, if you think about it, what does that mean? Is you don't get any income till it's finished, sold, and settles. So that's a long time between pay. Might be a good chunk of money. Maybe that 50 grand I spoke about, it's 100 grand today. But most people struggle to get paid monthly, let alone every 12 months. And other developments could be 2 years, 3 years.
Probably have to be pretty disciplined as well once you get that 100K.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
When's your next 100 coming, and is it definitely coming? And how do you make this last and manage your money well so that you don't spend it all in the first 2 months?
Yeah, but very much like a business now, because businesses have the same issues of whatever cash flow cycle they're in. So you just pick a contingency. Now, I value stability and safety, so I said, look, I think I can get paid every at least 12 months with the cycle of staggering deals. So I'll put 2 years of expenses aside. So now I've got 100% redundancy. That's pretty extreme, but when you're taking a leap of faith, it is good to have a bit of comfort around you. And then I bought myself 2 years basically. So what I did was still paid myself on the same day I got paid for a job. I actually still pay myself on that same day to all these years later.
I'm the same. I pay myself just that standard reoccurring amount, which I don't know about you, but mine covers like all my base living and, just gives me and my wife an entertainment sort of salary. And I kind of just love that stability of that. And then
some guardrails, so it conditions you to spend in a controlled way. Exactly. And that way I knew I didn't have to worry when a few months into it, when I didn't, obviously the income is lumpy, development's a slow moving thing. I didn't have to freak out because the pay kept coming every fortnight. And that was really crucial for me, because what I also found, so those were the practical things. The emotional side was surprising. I hadn't been working a job for that long. I was probably this stage around 30 when I left. So I did a few developments over a few years before I took the plunge. Even then, though, I hadn't been working that long, I was still very conditioned to that sort of world. And there is a lot of conditioning if you think about it. If you've want to get a mortgage, the bank wants to see your pay slips. If you want to get a car loan, the bank wants to see your pay slips. You and I are obviously self-employed. When you're not self-employed, you start getting all sorts of penalties for this sort of stuff if you don't draw a wage. Yes, they might lend to you, but the paperwork is 10 times as much. They don't really want to do it. The fees are up, the interest rates are up, and it all gets a lot harder. So I found that very interesting and surprising that what happened was I would, a few months into it, I'd start finding my mind going to places like, oh, geez, I would have earned this much if I was still working, whereas I haven't even bought my next site yet. And those sorts of thoughts. That's natural when you're outside your comfort zone. And the way you tackle it is you prove to yourself that it's real. So you have to keep taking action. Then you buy something, you do another development, and after a few years, it all switched around. Like if you said to me now that I had to go get another job, I can almost not even conceive of that, having to do an interview, get someone's permission to work for them.
We become pretty unemployable, don't we?
That's right. Yeah, I'm long-term unemployed, and I love it. Yeah, we've, as you know, we have a 7-month-old son, our first child, and I just take for granted that I can come and go as I need to around him. My wife is on maternity leave, but the payments have run out. Whatever the government gives you is run out, but that's not a big deal. We've got cash aside so she can keep doing it full time. All this flexibility that comes from working for myself, it turned around to when I first quit, I missed the job. Now I couldn't conceive of it.
Did you have that initial moment of like, oh, wow, I've got so much freedom, but then I had oh, wow, I actually need to be really productive here with my own time. Otherwise, I'm not going to get ahead kind of thing.
Look, this might give a few insights into my mind, and I'm a bit differently wired, but I had the opposite, that I was very well aware of the risk of. The thing with development is you might only buy a couple of sites a year, right? So you could just buy around. If you knew that.
Was this why a lot of it could be done, realistically while you're working? And you managed to do that with your first 3 or 4 projects, as you said. I think it's realistic and feasible for people to do smaller projects, and that's what I did while I was working as well. So
yeah, definitely, yeah. But so if you knew that 100%, if you knew that, yep, in 2 months' time there'd be one property and I'd make one offer, you knew 100% that would happen, then you could actually have heaps of free time. But that's not how the world works. So I was aware of that, and I was like, no, I need to get moving, because I bought time, yes, but I run out of time, then I'm going to have to go back to a job and reset. And so I remember sitting down on my first day, and because I've been doing it part-time, I now had to figure out what full-time looks like. And I actually found that quite hard over the first few months, not just filling my time with anything, but figuring out how to make it a full-time job and making it productive time. So, yeah, I remember sitting at my desk by about 11 a.m. sort of being like, okay, what do I do for the rest of the day?
Just real quick before we continue on with the episode, are you getting my email updates yet? If you're not, you're missing out on our suburb intelligence reports, which we tailor and prepare for your individual suburbs of interest, showing advanced stats and insights. Must get onto those. And I also send out exclusive invitations to our events, including webinars, sundowners, and workshops. So if you're not getting those, head on over to investorsedge.com.au/join and make sure you're receiving my email updates.
So walk us through like that first development project, like what went right, what went wrong. Obviously enough happened right that you kept going from that point. You said it was a reno sell. How did that all sort of come about? And you mentioned the profit that you made, but yeah.
Yeah, it was a great little project. I bought a house in Parkwood in about end of 2009. And the great thing with this house is Parkwood, it's one of those suburbs, people don't know it, it's near Willerton, and it was one of these suburbs that was an early, what we call a housing estate now. So they developed it probably around the 70s. They would have released a bunch of land, and home buyers would come in, buy their land and build a pretty cookie cutter type of house through whoever the main project builders would have been at the time. So it has a lot of uniformity, and there's basically all the blocks about 700 square meters, and there's 2 types of houses. There was the 3-bedroom ones and the 4-bedroom ones that were a bit bigger. So what I realized when I was searching was that there was the trick with doing a reno is you need to be able to add enough value to buy it and pay your stamp duty stuff on the way in, pay your selling costs on the way out. That's about, say, 10% on purchase price, both those combined. Then you've got to do the work to the property, which, about 10% of the purchase price is a rough guide for what a reno would be. And then you've got to hold it. So let's just call that 5% off the top of my head. then you've got to make some profit. So we're talking like 35, 40% increase in purchase price that you need to sell the thing for. So if you buy it for 500,000, well, maybe we can't do that these days. Maybe I'll just say 800,000. You need to bump it up by 40%, which is 4 times 8 is 320. You need to sell for a bit over $1 million to make it worth your while. So those are reasonably significant margins. And what I realized as I was trying to find the project, was that if I bought a 3-bedroom and place and could turn it, I wanted to turn it into a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, then that would probably give me the margin. And in Parkwood, what was great is because there was this clear formula, it's a very uniform suburb, you should see exactly what the 3x1s were worth and what the 4x2 would be at the end. And I just noticed as I was researching for areas to look at, I looked at the typical prices in that area, and there it was. The margin was there, and there was a property for sale. I went and inspected it. And what was great with this one is that at some point after the house was built, someone decided to extend the house, but they only added more living area. They didn't add any extra bedrooms. So it was the same size as the 4x2 houses, but it was a 3x1. So I bought it for the 3x1 price. And then I did a cosmetic style renovation inside, having to add stud walls and things for a new bathroom and bedroom. And then I had a 4x2 house. So yeah, that was the strategy. What went well was it worked. I made money. I made the money I thought I was going to make. What went wrong was probably, some of the challenges I remember was firstly finding it was a lot harder than I was led to believe. You get geared up to buy a property, do a development, you're really excited, and you start looking, and everything you look at pretty much loses money. And then after a few months to try to figure out what was going wrong, I found some things that made money, but not enough to be worthwhile. And it really made me question, does this even work? And for anyone who might be going through this or wanting to start this journey, yes, it does, but you are looking for a profitable development of any type is a rare thing. So you really need to know how to eliminate things that aren't going to work. And so that's how I found this one. As I said, I realized, look, I'm going to need a strategy here that's going to give me this margin, which is going to be add bedroom and bathroom. I need to go through every suburb in my price range and just look at what typical buy prices are or the typical sell prices are and figure out which ones probably have a margin there just off market pricing. If I can do that and end up with 5 or 6 suburbs on my list, then all I have to do is wait for the property to come up, which will be, I'll be able to buy at the market price. I'm not trying to do anything too crazy to buy it, and then sell it at the market price, and then it'll work. And that's exactly what happened. And I remember I did it on the weekend. I spent like 2 days going through 50 suburbs, and then it was around the evening. Parkwood came up. I checked what was for sale. The property was there. I went there the next day, and it was the right one. So that was probably the first challenge. And then doing the reno is always hard when you haven't done a reno.
Well, that's not straight cosmetic. Adding a bathroom is still, a fairly decent thing to take on.
Yeah. Look, it was. But the interesting thing, one thing I think has always blessed me with renos is I am not a handy person at all. So I did put a bit of sweat equity into this because I was cash constrained, being my first deal. I can paint and I could sort of demolish and do the labouring stuff with a bit of help from Dad, and Mum helped me painting. So that was what we could put in. But I've got nothing else. Some people can install a kitchen, some people can do a bit of tiling. Not me. It's not what I'm suited to do. I've never wanted to do it. I've never done it, and I never will do it. These days, I pride myself on my house that I need some pictures hung. I'm getting a guy around to do it for me because they'll do a better job. It's all about leaning into what you like and what you're good at, right? So the good thing with that is I couldn't be tempted to bite off more than I could chew. So yes, it was an undertaking, but what does that mean? It actually means just find some good trades, understand, be able to describe to them the scope of work and estimate the costs well. So one thing I did find stressful was cost estimations. Very hard when you've never done it because materials is easy. I'd go to Bunnings and figure that out. But how much does the plumber cost to give you plumbing work for a new bathroom? Very hard to estimate. Even ask the plumber that, and they find it hard. So they'll add a bit of contingency on this and that. These days, I mainly do it off reference projects. So if you've just done a reno, now you know the cost. So yeah, cost control was hard, and I had a few stressful moments where things were coming in a bit more expensive, and I was a bit short of cash, but I managed to get through it. And the biggest challenge was probably just the learning curve. I was living in the house at the time as well, so I had to. Yeah, we're obviously demolishing the kitchen, so you can live out of a laundry if you're ever in that situation. All you need is running water, microwaves, and a George Foreman grill, and I could make myself all sorts of meals. So yeah,
single bachelor days, grinding it out to get your first project done. Nice. So, how has your approach, I guess, changed to development, and how has it sort of evolved since then? Because that was the starting point.
Yeah, that was the starting point. And I think from then it's really just been refining processes and turning this into a business. Yeah, I run a business now. We have 13 projects on at the moment. We usually buy 4 to 6 projects a year. We are a property syndicator, so we raise capital and work with investors who invest in our projects. That removes one of the biggest constraints for development is capital. So if you want to do more projects, how do you fund them? Well, we partner with other people and share the upside. So that works really well. I have 2 other business partners and about 5 staff working with us. And we try to lean into the things that we're best at. So I am the head of property, which means I do all the acquisitions and oversee all the selling, but I have systems and team members to help me. So how would I approach this project now? It's probably a little bit too small for us, but let's just say, how do I approach a project? The same rules still apply around how I look for areas. That's systemized. I have an assistant to help me with that, but I find the site, I get it under offer, I coordinate the DD with the team, then I hand it to the project team and off they go. And they do a really good job of delivering projects, much better than me. And then it comes back to me at the end and I make sure it's sold well. So very different approach to when I was in there painting it myself and doing the demolition.
Awesome. Well, things have come a long way. I guess many of our listeners own typically 1 to 2 investment properties. Is there a better way for them to start thinking about dipping their toe into small-scale development without taking on too much risk, or is there such a way at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. And look, I think the first thing I'd say is just be clear on why you're developing. So what I love about development is it's not, as I said before, it's not investing because it's going to be work. Whether you get other people to do it or not, someone has to coordinate it. That's your role as the developer. And you're taking on the risk, as you just said. So, but what is great is combine that with your investing and suddenly you have you can turbocharge what you're doing. So if you just take your normal, I'm a buy and hold investor and I want to buy in a growth area and hold and get the capital growth. Well, we already know there's a lot of challenges around that, such as the moment you buy and settle, you've probably incurred 5% costs through your stamp duty and closing costs. So you're negative 5% capital growth. You need 5% growth that year just to break even. Cash flow is a real constraint. Finding positive cash flow property was good when the rents were going up and the interest rates were low. Pretty hard last few years. Just as a single tenancy, there's other cash flow strategies that I'm sure you've talked about on the podcast. But now you're losing whatever you're losing through your negative gearing. So your property to break even over time might have to start achieving an average couple of % growth a year. That's good. But what if you run out of money in between and you can't, something changes in your life and you can't grow, and in the first couple of years you have to sell it? Well, now you're looking at a loss. Whereas the way I approach things, if I'm going to hold them or look to hold them, would be I'm going to buy something really run down that needs improvement, whether it's a vacant land, something that can be subdivided and built on, or just a straight reno. So starting out projects, I think I would suggest the lower risk stuff is renovate a house because there's already a house there. Buy a vacant title block of land and build a house, and get some margin from that. Or buy a house, subdivide the backyard, either sell that as land or build on that. And so if you add that into your investing, then now you can buy low. So that might help if you're a bit constrained with borrowing and so on. And then you add value and get some equity uplift. Well, now you're ahead on day one of finishing that project. So if you need to exit for any reason, you walk out with a profit versus being behind on day one. And then cash flow plays into it as well. If you're smart, you can increase the rent. So
have a better quality of tenant than you would have otherwise gotten to, like less headaches.
Yeah, and maybe you are on your cost. If you look at your return on cost now, if you've added value, maybe you are covering the cost. Maybe you are slightly ahead. So that's the first point. You asked me, how should people approach it? I think, firstly, just be clear on how you might want to incorporate it into your strategy.
I think it's worth thinking about as well, where's your bottleneck? And this is something I talk about all the time. Is it borrowing capacity or is it cash flow? And then you can kind of backwards work out as to what am I trying to, achieve with this property and the overall portfolio too.
Yep. And then in terms of where to start, well, look, if you already own property, look at what you have. Maybe there's a development opportunity there, even if it's a renovation. And that allows you to add some value. Yeah, the biggest thing with development, there is a learning curve. It's not hard, but it's complex in that there's a lot of steps. And what will blow you up in development is missing something unknown that you didn't know about. The unknown unknowns, as that term, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it really describes it well. When you're starting, there's going to be a lot of unknown unknowns. When I've been doing this for 15 years, if I pivot to a new strategy or a new market segment, such as we do some stuff with NDIS property. When we pivoted into that, one thing we're very aware of is there's a lot of unknown here, and you're going to find them out as you do the project, but you want to make sure that that's not going to lead to a loss. So definitely the safest way to do this is to do it in small chunks and get experience in different things. I wouldn't run out and buy an apartment project or a mixed commercial residential apartment for my first project because there's too many new things to learn. A renovation, a subdivision, or building on a block of land. All of that is good experience. The second bit that I strongly encourage everyone is don't just take a punt and learn on your own. Work with someone in the space that knows what they're doing. So decide what role you want with this and how it fits into your investing. If you want to be the one adding the value, a bit like what I did, go and find a good coach. There's plenty of training programs out there. I already said that Results Mentoring is who I work with. There's others. They're not cheap, but they're not that expensive. $10,000, $15,000 compared to $100,000 loss if you muck it up. Or if you want to be involved with this more from an arm's length, then partner with someone and do a form of JV. I said earlier, we're syndicators. We have plenty of people who they might run their own business. They might have a job they enjoy. They want to be involved in development, but they're not interested in doing the work. They can invest money into a project and get a share of the profits. And there's plenty of people around that do that sort of thing. So that way you get to see how an expert does it. And even if you want to do it yourself one day as well, it allows you just to look over their shoulder and see how the thing works. And at least just decide, does this feel right for me? Or, you know what, this actually did have a fair few ups and downs. Maybe that's not for me. And I'll let someone like Adam do that for me, and I'll go off and do my buy and hold of investing as well. And get the outcome you want.
I've definitely seen over the years that people get very excited by the thought of property development. It can be very sexy, telling your friends at the barbecue, I'm a property developer. And, some of the realities are very different, as you've alluded to there. And I think if you can assemble a bit of a team of experts as well. When I first started out, I tried to do everything yourself. And I think that comes about because you don't have very much money and you're trying to just save every dollar. But then those unknowns eat into things far more than you think. And if you'd had an expert, you would have saved more than it would have cost in paying them.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, one big learning for me came about after a few renos. I got a guy in who was a licensed builder who I paid to be a project manager for me. And what was interesting is that this was pre-COVID when prices were a bit more reasonable. But at that point, I could pay him to do that and take all that off my mind. And he did the reno cheaper than I could do, because simple things like with, say, carpentry, I'd have to say I wanted to remove a wall, I'd have to get a company in that did that sort of thing, and they'd pay essentially for a manager in that rate, and then the guys doing the work. For him, he was the manager. He had a carpentry background. He'd just get the guys in to do the work, and I'd end up just paying for that instead of the management overhead, which I'd already paid for with him. And so it was just more efficient. And it was, once I realized that, I was like, man, it probably should have been, when you asked me for what I'd do differently next time, that would be a big one, is get someone else in to oversee the whole thing as soon as you can afford it. And they'll probably do a better job than you would anyway.
Yeah. I'm using a renovation project manager and architect to do the reno on our house that we're living in. And that was very much from knowing how much time it takes. I wanted to compress that time, because time's money at the moment, and especially if you have to be out of your house for any sorts of periods. A lot of people do that, live in, renovate while they're there. Very tough when you're disrupting the whole family.
Very tough. I'm actually, because we've just had our little boy, we built a new house, which we moved in last year, but we started building it in 2020, and building times being what they were, one of these COVID delays, we designed it as a house for us as a couple where we could start a family, with the idea being in a few years we'd move. Well, now we're approaching that, because as Declan gets bigger, if we have another kid, we want a different type of house. So I'm starting to plan what my next PPR is. Being a developer, I won't buy something on market. This house was a really weird block of land, and we bought it, and we just by building it, we made a really good profit. We're going to be doing that again. And it's very likely that I might end up renovating something. But despite running a business that does this day in, day out, we don't offer services to external clients. It's just for our own internal projects. So I can't get the business to do the reno for me. And I can do a reno, but as you said, just that mental burden of doing it. If I buy something for my own house, I'm going to get someone else in, just like you have, to manage the whole thing for me, because while I know how to do it, it's just too much strain to be balancing that at this point in time, given I've got a business and a family. So, yeah.
One of the things we're starting to set up for our clients is we get asked on our buyer's agency side all the time, can we buy something to renovate? Can your property managers facilitate that? We can do, some new carpet here, some light fittings here. We can use our electrical, our plumbing trades, our handymen. But really, what people are looking for goes well beyond what is general property management. It's renovation project management. So we're partnering and finding some good project managers at the moment that we're in the process of sort of vetting and putting together a bit of a formula with, so that when we look at a property, we know we do this to the kitchen, we do this to the bathroom, we do this to the rest of the house. We'll know what the sort of blanket cost is for a 3x1, 4x2, and then look at those other ways, like you mentioned, of, how do we identify those properties where you can add that value in with the extra bathroom, extra room, try to find the 3x1 with 3 living areas, or the extra space to, make it a 4x2. Even if it ends up as a smaller 4x2, that still jumps the value. And then, we can have that expert provide input on costing from the beginning, and then manage the project through after we've bought it. And then we can either rent it out for a higher price, revalue for that person so they can, go again, or sell it and advise them on those end prices for rent and sale. And I think that's going to fill a bit of a gap for people, because I think people either underestimate how much is involved, or they and then they end up discovering that it's a full-time job and stressing them out entirely, affecting their whole family world. What have you seen? And then the other way is people can't find the right expert, or can't sort of pull together those experts. How have you seen pulling together of those experts? How have you kind of gotten good at that? Is it just trial and error?
That's a very good question. I actually haven't felt that to be a massive problem for quite a while. And there's two sides to it. One is a network, and there's an interesting thing. I remember early on when finding good trades was a problem, or felt like a problem. Once I found one good trade, that was actually my electrician. He's the only trade that I'm still working with today. Not just because, over 15 years, not that there weren't other good trades, but it's more that over 15 years, people go in all sorts of directions. And, it's all like him, good trades, no other good trades, and value good trades. So he'd give me referrals to other guys, and then it'd spiral from there, and then you'd have a good trade base. The same with your consultants, builders, architects, all the rest of it. So I think leaning into the network was very important. I needed to, actually came up the other month. So we moved into our house, and we didn't really fit out our walk-in robe that well. We didn't really think about it that much through the building design, and we realised we needed to redo the thing.
There's always little gaps, isn't there, when you build? And you learn where these gaps are. So every time I then build again, I'm like, I didn't think about finishing these things, or I didn't finish. I just try and include as much in the build contract now as possible to not have to think about it later.
Yeah, and that there's already a fixing carpenter in the kitchen. Why didn't I do it for the bathroom? So I needed a good fixing carpenter for wardrobes. I just did wardrobes. So that's not usually how we're operating, because we're getting guys in who are going to do the whole lot. And so we didn't really have that type of offering on our team. And also I wanted a bit of design advice, because, we didn't know how to design it. And so I just messaged one person in my network who I knew would know. She gave me a good contact. It got done. So, that's probably the easiest way, is lean into groups like we said earlier. We have a Facebook page. If you post on there, on the Perth Property Developers group, if you post that you're after someone, you'll get other people referring. You've got a Facebook page. It's never been easier to do that type of thing.
Awesome. Well, we've covered heaps of ground today, Adam. What I'm going to do is break this up into a two-parter, and we'll come back and ask you a few other questions on the other side in our next episode. But really enjoying our chat today. If people have, make sure you like and subscribe, share it with a friend. Head on over to Perth Property Developers if you're not already on their Facebook group. Join in the combos. And every day we hear from listeners who need help with their strategic planning, their buyer's agency, property management and sales. So if you think we can help, reach out for a friendly chat, and we'll see if we can. So that's at investorsedge.com.au. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you in the next one.
Just a reminder, the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. As we don't know your specific situation, you should always seek professional advice before taking any action. For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my property investor update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. I'll see you in the group.